Hi everyone, and welcome to this evening's event, organised as part of the Interfaith Week, that will aim to bring communities together, highlight their works and experiences during the past few months of our COVID-19 pandemic. All of us have undoubtedly been impacted by the pandemic, religious or not, but the UK faith communities have been hit particularly hard, as they've had to close their community hubs and worship for extended periods of time or shorten their service, restructure many of the services that they provide to help contain the spread of the coronavirus. Despite all of this, though, faith groups have been working tirelessly to bring communities together, reduce issues in communities such as loneliness and other difficulties that people may be suffering from. With their never-ending and inspiring their communities, messages of hope and positivity being spreading across our communities. So as the Dialogue Society, we wanted to bring light to these events and share them today, in unison with all our different faith groups, and highlight these to them and, hopefully spread that positivity even further. So without further ado, and keeping you guys from waiting any longer, I'd like to pass on to our first speaker, Reverend Lowe from the Hove Methodist. The microphone's yours. Thank you.
Hello, lovely to be with you all today and to join in this. It's the Interfaith Contact Group in Brighton and Hove has always been for me a highlight of my engagement with our community and a real place of friendship and support that I found in my ministry. And so I'm grateful to be able to kind of feed into this today. I think the first thing that I want to say might sound in some ways a little bit negative, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. I want to start with that it was just shortly after the COVID pandemic was hitting us and lockdown was happening that, along with so many others from different faith traditions and no faith tradition itself, Christians around the world and in this country, and certainly in Brighton and Hove, were so incensed by what we saw with the murder of George Floyd that despite the pandemic, it was a straw that broke the back of our being silent in the face of prejudice that is experienced by so many people from so many communities around the world, but also in our own country, in our own city. And that for many of us, despite the restrictions, we joined the Black Lives Matter march that was held in Brighton and Hove just as a sign of solidarity. I do not want to excuse in any sense the institutional racism and prejudice that exists in the Christian church, both national and in many local places too. And also the unintentional racism and prejudice that exists because many, like me, are white, Christian, and privileged. Just because we are white and Christian. I've been humbled by the acceptance of many faith groups that have heard the plea to contain the virus by having to lock down buildings and community hubs to stop essential work that's been going on and stopping those sacred moments in our lives. And that they've done it at times of their most important festivals. At the same time, I've been horrified by the cries from many within the Christian church that we should be exempt from some of those restrictions, that we should be able to hold indoor gatherings and whatever the level of affection, and that Christmas, above all other celebrations, must be allowed to happen, if not in our usual way, certainly in a modified way. And I just want to say that the Methodist churches in Brighton and Hove will not be celebrating Christmas in our buildings this year. We have chosen to believe that the right thing to do is to continue to protect our vulnerable people and vulnerable people throughout our communities by not gathering in our usual way. For myself, I also do it in a spirit of solidarity with my sisters and brothers of other faith traditions who have had to find different ways of celebrating their important festivals and to build and maintain community. So with that slight rant over, let me move to a more positive side. My guess is that we in Hove and Brighton and Hove Methodist churches have not done anything that you have not done in your own faith communities and your own traditions. We are not special above anyone else. We are all in this together, I truly believe. We will, like you, have been making phone calls to vulnerable people, trying to visit them in some way, to distribute material, just to keep people in contact with each other in the best ways we can. Our worship services have been online as a group of churches. What that has meant as a benefit is that some people previously excluded from our worship because they are housebound, invalid in some way, have now been able to join us in worship, even if they've had to wrestle sometimes with technology at times when they might not have wanted to. But we know that others have not managed to wrestle with technology successfully, but worship sheets have been provided, news sheets sent round, different ways of trying to keep in touch with people through all of this. At Hove Methodist Church, amongst the other Methodist churches, we closed our buildings during the first lockdown and again during this lockdown. The only activity that were taking place on our buildings during that time was a food distribution centre. As a church and in partnership with a local charity, we have lunch clubs 2 days a week, which have fed people who are elderly and isolated on one of the days, about 80 odd people coming each time. And on another day, 50 to 60 people, adults with learning difficulties. And we've not wanted to abandon them in any way. They're not necessarily members of our church community, but people from around our community who we work with and alongside. We obviously weren't able to invite them into our building, and so our kind of lunch club turned into a food delivery club. And we know that many other places have actually done the same in Brighton and Hove, as well as in other areas. If you want to know more of that or see more of that, the experience across Brighton and Hove, there is a wonderful video called Light in the Lockdown 2020, and that is on the Brighton and Hove Interfaith Contact Group's website. And it gives, I think, a really good insight of what a number of our faith communities have been trying to do over the lockdown period. We not only had our own lunch club going at that time, our food deliveries, but we became a food hub for other communities too. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who meet on our premises, had a food hub working from our place, and we became a temporary home for a charity called the Junk Food Project. And so there was an awful lot of food coming in and coming out of our building, but just one of the ways that we tried to serve people who were often isolated and sometimes who were needing food and if you like, a balanced meal because they weren't able always to cook for themselves. We were just about to reopen our lunch club to a much smaller group of people when the second lockdown were announced. And so immediately there was thought of, well, where do we go now? But one of the things that we had been struck by was that we were often providing food for people when actually it wasn't necessarily the food they needed, but it was some kind of company to take them out of their isolation, that often they could provide food for themselves. The food was just a means, if you like, for conversation and gathering together. And so our emphasis in our food deliveries has changed. And instead now of providing kind of between 80 meals twice a week around the community, we are now making up food parcels and distributing food parcels to those who are in food poverty. And we get various people referred to us, and we're part of, or we work alongside a initiative called CHOMP, which is run by One Church in Brighton, which aims to feed people, families especially during school holidays, people who would otherwise get free school meals. And we know what an outcry there has been over the half term, kind of led by Marcus Rashford amongst others, but is just part of a campaign which is just widely felt and held throughout all our communities, whether faith communities or not faith communities. And so we now are kind of doing that, and we're providing over 20 food parcels a week to families that we have been made aware of who are in food poverty. Some we know personally, some are being referred to us from various social services. So we will keep supporting them and those families during all of this time and beyond this time, because the end of lockdown will not stop the end of need, and we are just too aware of that. As we journey towards Christmas, for us at Hove Methodist Church in particular, we've had a tradition for the last 43 years where we have provided lunches on Christmas Day, a traditional Christmas fare for those who might otherwise be spending Christmas on their own. For the first time this year, we won't be able to do that in our building. And we will instead be delivering over 150 traditional Christmas meals to people around our community who we know are isolated or in food poverty, people who we have worked in, and other people who are being referred to us. And that's one of the things that we are busy working on. And what we're really always grateful for and always get is the vast number of people who volunteer to help on these days. People from our faith community, people from other faith communities, people who have no faith, but who join us in that common concern for all humanity, that we might be brothers and sisters in love, serving each other, helping each other, encouraging each other in our daily living. I think the final thing that I would want to say is that the only groups that we have been allowing on our premises, apart from food, are those which we see as essential for the well-being of people in our communities as well. 12-step support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, and CODA. And groups like that we've allowed to keep their presence for their community, vital services, for we believe that that's part of the work that all our faith communities should be involved in, whoever we are, in our support for one another, building each other up and showing that common concern and love. So that's us really in a bit of a nutshell. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Reverend, for highlighting the work that you do with surrounding food, which I think a lot of our faith communities can really understand, because I volunteered in a local mosque before, and the services to homeless people and other vulnerable groups are also circling around food. So I think it's a nice way to bring communities and hubs together as well. So it's lovely to hear about the work that you're doing there, both with people who may be lonely in the community or those with learning disabilities, as you mentioned. And I even made note of it, the phrase that you said, the end of lockdown will not stop the end of need. And it's so true. And I think it's nice that you also mentioned, the variety of people who help to volunteer on special days such as Christmas, whether they're from a Christian background or not. And I just think those two kind of concepts coming together really shone through in your message and kind of keeps the message of hope alive. So thank you very much for sharing your own experiences with us today. On to our next speaker, we have Imam Monawar Hussain, the chairman and founder of the Oxford Foundation.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu alayka Sayyidul Mursaleen wa ala alika wa sahbika ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you all. Thank you very much, Aisha, for inviting me, and to Mahmoud. Thank you for organizing this wonderful evening. And thank you also for the words that you've expressed and the sentiments you've expressed, Reverend Lowe. So very nice to meet you virtually as well. I think you're absolutely right that the need will be greater. We're going to have, well, it's already happening. People are losing their jobs. There's going to be a huge economic impact. And that's why these kinds of meetings are really important, that we remain together, ensure solidarity, and continue to look after each other. And I think what struck me about the pandemic and our response to it, one of our neighbours, I think within a few days of the lockdown, initiated a volunteering system where the local neighbourhood could volunteer to do groceries for vulnerable people who are self-isolating, and that kind of encapsulates the kind of response that we've had so from individuals. And it's almost as if there's a kind of recovery of community taking place again, a sense of actually talking to your neighbors, talking to people on your street, those people who we never met, putting leaflets through through the letterbox, exchanging telephone numbers, emails. That's been a really positive thing. We've also had, of course, the local mosques and many other faith groups too, looking out for and providing food for those who are vulnerable, for the homeless, delivering food to families who are in need, in real desperate need. So they've been delivering food packages to them. I've also been impressed by local businesses, who've delivered their groceries, and they know who their local clientele are. There's a lot of people who are lonely, who don't have any support. So they've been able to support them. One of our local taxi firms, I was talking to the owner, and he said, they've been providing sort of free, certainly at the start of the lockdown, free lifts and transport to people who are vulnerable. So that's a really positive thing. I mean, in such a difficult time. I mean, there's one family I know who've been providing a meal a day for one of their neighbours, and that's been going on for many months now. And I just think that takes a huge amount of dedication, love, compassion, kindness, a whole load of things that all our faith traditions teach us. Because, it's one thing to talk about love and all this, but we have to actually, the challenge from our faiths is to live it. That's the harder part, living this. In terms of the Oxford Foundation, I suppose within a short period of the lockdown beginning, on my birthday, it wasn't much of a birthday, it was just sort of family coming, just us on our own. And a friend of mine rang and he said, Eid is coming up soon. And last year, I wanted to thank the hospital staff and cemetery and various registrars and the coroner's office, because these are people often who help the Muslim community so much to ensure that we have speedy burials, that we can really kind of make sure that we deliver our funeral rites and so on speedily. But nobody, hardly ever they get a thanks from the community, as it were. So last year I began with a list of 20 people. I think I think Penny and Chinta were there. I think we ended up having just over 100 people. So this year, my friend said, well, why don't we do a virtual Eid, kind of event? And we ended up doing a global Eid celebration, which began live from Pakistan with a Kallie music group, then went to Bangladesh, went to Canada, the USA, and of course UK. And we were able to get some really amazing and hugely popular singers. You know, for example, Radiohead, Phil Selve very kindly contributed. There's one Bangladeshi pop star who retweeted or shared our post to about 1.5 billion of his followers. And nobody charged us a single penny, and we did that within two weeks. And I think that brought a great deal of joy to people. And that's the other thing we've got to remember. Yes, things are bad, but let's try and bring some joy to people. And so that's one of the things that we've managed to do. And to really thank, I want to emphasize this with my sort of hospital chaplaincy hat on as well, is to thank the NHS, thank my colleagues who go in, day out, put their lives at risk to serve others. You know, the cemetery people, the coroner's office, the bereavement people, the registrars, a whole load of people who've been helping our community. The other thing we also set up was the Oxfordshire Community Hub. Like, I thought it would be wonderful to share stories of people in the county of Oxfordshire. What they do is, you know, share their music, maybe share a story, or talk about their own faith group. So we've recorded a number of interviews with local faith and civic leaders and religious leaders as well. We also, actually talking about this, I want to also mention and shout out, as it were, our local Muslim funeral directors. They have men and women who are volunteers. And at the start of the pandemic, we weren't sure whether we could wash our deceased. And so they went out of their way to get the proper PPE kit and trained all their volunteers to ensure that we can deliver the last rites. And so I want, you know, express my gratitude and thanks to them on behalf of the family, families whom they've supported. We've also had what we call an online hatam, because we've had people in the community who've passed away. Some very dear friends have passed away. And I thought, well, what is it that we can do to try and bring some comfort to them? So we've had a kind of online, I don't know whether you'd say a service, but it's readings of the Quran and offering prayers for the deceased. So we've done that as well. And I've also personally set up a local fund for COVID-19 to support people who are vulnerable, and that's administered by the Oxfordshire Community Foundation, who should also get a shout out, because they've been doing some wonderful work supporting many vulnerable individuals and groups and charities in our county. So I suppose that's pretty much it from me. I mean, there's just so much more to do. I must plug also the One World Festival that takes place this Sunday. So this Sunday at the Ashmolean Museum, University of Oxford, we're launching the One World Festival at 2:30 p.m. It'll be broadcast, streamed live on Ashmolean Museum YouTube channel. So, and that again, we'll launch a video with prayers and music and song from different communities. And Penny's here, and so is Chinta from the Jewish and Hindu community. So all our communities represented on there. So thank you very much, Aisha.
No, thank you very much, Imam. Firstly, starting off with acts of kindness that individuals in the community have been doing, you know, from the grocery shopping that you mentioned, simple acts of kindness, you put it, you know, talking to people, exchanging emails and telephone numbers, and you know, our faith groups are playing a big role, but us as community members, individuals in society are also playing that role. So I think it's definitely important to recognize, acknowledge that. I mean, we were only 2 speakers in, but I'm excited at the tremendous amount of work that we've kind of heard from both speakers so far. The Eid celebration sounded amazing. I'm gutted I missed it. But I'm looking forward to the One World Festival on Sunday, and I've made note of that as well. So hopefully I will join you as well. Thank you very much for sharing your community's work throughout the pandemic, and I'm sure it will continue as it was before afterwards as well. So thank you very much for being with us this evening. I'm going on swiftly on to our next speaker, Penny Faust, the president of the Oxford Jewish Congregation. You are muted.
I'd also like to start, not necessarily in the Jewish congregation, but just as somebody who lives on a street in the suburbs of Oxford, and talk about the enormous community that has grown. You know, we were really rather a typical group in on a street. People who've come recently, people who've been around perhaps for about 8 or 10 years. But not necessarily working people, some retired people, but on the whole, not communicating so much with each other as we did in the other communities where we lived. But suddenly we found ourselves going out every week to clap for the NHS. Now, I don't know whether people have heard about that, but across the country, once a week, you stood outside your front door at 8 o'clock in the evening and you clapped. And we became a community. People stopped, they didn't just do the clapping bit, and you could hear clapping from coming all over the area. We're up on a hill outside Oxford, and you could hear the clapping from Oxford, and you can hear the clapping from Barton just outside. But we didn't stop when it clapped. Everybody stood out in the street for about half an hour afterwards to chat to each other, properly socially distanced. Telephone numbers were exchanged. People volunteered, the younger people volunteered to help the older people. There was a continual process of doing the shopping, of making sure people were all right. And suddenly we felt, instead of just being a suburban street, we had turned into a street community. And that I found really heartening, because I only moved here 6 or 7 years ago. I'd been somewhere else for 40 years. And I really missed my 40-year community when I moved here. But suddenly I realized that where I was had turned into a community as well. And what we really tried to do is go on doing that. So although we don't come out once a week at the moment, and certainly the weather isn't always as good as it could be, so one understands that, there is still a constant interchange with the people who are vulnerable, with the people who, you know, have had a problem. And it's really been very reassuring to know that you can be part of your street community as well as your faith community. Now I'm going to go on to talk about my faith community. Oxford is a unique Jewish congregation. Instead of having the different denominations which you would traditionally find within British Jewish society, Orthodox on one side, the liberal progressives on the other, something called Masorti in the middle, the Reform more in the middle. And normally, if you go into a synagogue anywhere else in the country, and I think anywhere else in the world, you would find that that particular synagogue comes from a denomination. Well, in Oxford, it isn't that we couldn't make up our mind, it's that we wanted to embrace everybody. And we are a community of Jews. And on a Shabbat morning, on a Saturday morning, you can go in there and you will find at least 2 services going on. There's an Orthodox service every week. There's a progressive service twice a month. There's a Masorti service once a month. There are women's services. There are children's services. So we think of ourselves as all one community, encouraging people to pray in different ways. And I suppose the biggest feature of that is that you have to believe that what is appropriate for somebody else is as valid and credible for them as your particular way of doing things is to you. And that engenders a real spirit, not just of tolerance, though tolerance is important, it's a spirit of pluralism. And that permeates everything we do. We're a community that thinks very much of its younger people. And of course, as a university city with 2 universities, we have a lot of students who come to Oxford. And the Oxford Jewish Centre is not just a synagogue. In fact, we have 2 areas which can be used as synagogues, but we also have classrooms and we have a kosher kitchen and we feed the students. And that's gone on, obviously, with the first lockdown, the students were sent home. But when they all came back at the beginning of this term, We went on feeding them, and they looked after themselves in terms of COVID compliance in the building, and were enormously responsible. And we have gone on doing that all the way through. We now have because of lockdown again, we now have a kosher takeaway service, which the community are just starting to think about accessing. It's working very well for the students, and we think that it might work well. After all, you can't actually necessarily go to a kosher restaurant in Oxford. There aren't enough Jews to sustain that. But to be able to go and pick up a kosher takeaway meal seems to us to be a very positive way forward. We have a membership process, and all the people who are members of the congregation are held on a database. It isn't made available to anybody else, but we know who everybody is, and we have contact numbers. Now, when that came to lockdown, that was the biggest help we had, because we could make sure, first of all, that we made e-contact, email contact, any kind of technology contact with the people who we had, who we knew had the technology to be online. But we also knew who didn't access the internet for whatever reason. And we were able to make sure that we kept in contact with them. We started a telephone tree, and we made sure that every single person in the community who was not able to access the internet got a telephone call at least once a week. I have to tell you, that's not always welcome. We thought, everyone would be absolutely delighted. When you've rung up and you said, you're on my list of people to phone, and somebody said, who said you could phone me? I can manage perfectly well by myself. I have my own group of friends. And you said, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to hear that. But you have to take it carefully. You have to recognize that the people you may want to give to, or you may want to help, may not really think of themselves in that light, but they very often go on to help other people. And that's been enormously helpful too. We also were very fortunate to have a community worker who made herself responsible for running Zoom across the community. The first thing we did on lockdown was to transfer all the activities of the Jewish community, from the Sunday school to the older people's Wednesday club, from the youth groups to the play reading society, from the book clubs to, the only thing we couldn't manage was dancing. You can't do that online. You can't jiggle up and down in your own little area and hope to join in with everybody else. But it meant that we could continue to do the things that we had done before. It took time and it took patience, but we've actually also been able to enable people who've had the internet but haven't done the communications within the internet so much. They've done email perhaps, but they were able to take part too. And the lectures especially that we have every week for the adults, and the Sunday school that we have for the children, have been really successful. We have quite a few, because we're the only Jewish community within about at least 50 miles. We have quite a lot of people who come from rural areas or from towns that don't have their own community. And they were able for the first time to join in lectures or education sessions, or even be part of the governing council, because they could come to meetings without having to come into very crowded Oxford and find somewhere to park or face a walk in the rain. And that I think that's a positive benefit. And we are looking forward, we're saying, actually, that's something that we've learned, that when we do hold events at the Synagogue or Jewish Centre, we need to be able to have those Zoomed so that the people outside Oxford can also take part. It's been an enormous enablement in that sense. I guess that our concern, there were two sides of it. The different denominations had different rulings on the use of technology on High Holy Days and Shabbat. The more orthodox, the religious authorities said you can't break the Shabbat to watch services. But the liberals and progressives allowed the use of technology. Now, in a congregation like ours, it wasn't a question of going to a synagogue a different synagogue down the road where you weren't a member. It was just a question of switching your practice. And people were able to move fluidly between the two. The Orthodox and the Masorti were able to introduce some, what people might think of as family occasions for prayer in their, and transmit those so that everybody could join in. And the liberals had the standard services, again, inviting anybody to join in. And that was really helpful when it came to the High Holy Days. Passover was difficult. I don't know how many people know how important that is for Jews. It's in a sense, the first time that Jews really became together, not just one family, but a whole nation, a whole group of people. And it's I've had 4 children who've gone away on gap years, Australia, Jamaica, Trinidad, Canada. They've all found somewhere to go over Passover in the communities where they are, and they've all found it important enough to actually seek out those Jewish communities to be there. Well, I took my Passover sitting in an iPad on a table in one of my children's homes, and the 3 other families were also sitting on some kind of device, sitting on a table in the same home, and we were able to have Passover together. If we were strictly Orthodox, we wouldn't have been able to do that. But for us, it was more important to be part of the wider family than it was to be strict about our practice. And I guess for many Jews, those are the kind of things that you try not to be too rigid about your practice so that you can use the things that are available to you now in order to be able to meet the requirements of the festival. And also at Passover, you change the way that you eat, and you have to have special food. The community were lucky enough already to have an organization called Helping Hands. That was already in process. It gained a huge number of volunteers during lockdown. And we were able to take special kosher food to any families who needed it. As I had said at the time, we don't eat ordinary bread. We eat something called matzah, which is a baked biscuit. And I always said matzah fairies will come along and leave whatever you need on your doorstep. And that's been really good in the sense that we've been able to stay as part of one community, all supporting each other. And when it's come to bereavement, and the number of people that were allowed at a funeral have been very limited, we also have a practice within Judaism where people go to the person who's bereaved receives people in their house for a week afterwards, and they say prayers together. Well, there was absolutely nothing to stop us from doing that online. And when you have a huge number of people on Zoom, all there supporting the bereaved, it's a very warming feeling. It means you're still very much part of the community. You still are bereaved in the context of the support of your own congregation. And that's been very positive too. We have also been very lucky to receive a substantial donation of money which engendered more money for a hardship fund. And that's accessible to anyone who needs it. And very sadly, we've had a situation where a child of our community has had a brain tumor, and the family have needed financial support, and we've been able to give it. And that's been really, really positive. And again, has made people feel, well, if things go really pear-shaped for me, there's a community there to support me. So I think that in many ways, we've been very lucky. We're very sad that this year, as we look forward, normally over Christmas, the Jewish community have helped in the hospitals. We've delivered food to wards, we've run up and down so that it's taken the pressure off the people who are actually working there. Well, that's a no-no for this year. And we haven't thought yet about how we can do something to substitute, because of course, not even relatives can go into hospitals nowadays, let alone communities coming in to help. But there must be ways, and we're trying to be inventing. And I want to finish on a very positive note. One of the things that happen in Jewish communities is that whenever you have a service, after the service, you have something called a kiddush, where you have something to drink and something to eat, and the whole community who've been around, and with us, it's the different denominations all come together to have something to eat and drink and chat to each other. And that comes under the heading of a wonderful word called schmoozing. So what we've lost is the opportunity to schmooze. But we are in the process of inventing something called the Zoom schmooze, where people just go along on an evening and you can have breakout rooms in Zoom, and you can start off in one room and move yourself to another and chat to the people you want to chat to and gain some knowledge from them and exchange news about your families. And we're hoping that it's going to work well. For different age groups, it's called different things. One of them is called speaking socially. One of them is called the wine bar. You can tell which groups will go to which, but whichever it is, it means that going forward, and however long lockdown lasts, the people of our community will be able to speak to each other. Really important. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all, and thank you to the Dialogue Society for having this evening, which I think is going to be very inspiring for all of us.
Thank you very much, Penny. I mean, you started on a positive note and ended on a positive note, which was lovely. I think what you mentioned at the beginning is streets growing into communities is something that perhaps all of us, nearly all of us can relate to, because it's a very hard thing to achieve. I think, the community spirit in our daily lives, which were quite hectic, the early school runs, going to and from work and commitments afterwards, but it definitely brought people together from all walks of lives, and I think that was beautiful, and that was something that I hope continues after this pandemic is all over in its entirety. And I'd heard about the Jewish congregation in Oxford before. I think it was at an iftar event, perhaps earlier during the year, and the power of embracing diversity within a community itself was just something that inspired me, and I mean, I hope to visit and look into your work further, because I think it's unique within the Jewish community, but probably in other communities as well. I heard of a similar project, I think in Berlin, the House of One, in which a synagogue, mosque and church are to be united under one roof. But I think having that diversity within a faith tradition as well is extremely important, to have the unity there as well. And yeah, I mean, you talked about the long-term benefits of Zoom as well, which Reverend Lowe had also touched upon. So I hope that continues as well, keeping vulnerable communities who perhaps can't come out and use our buildings in normal times can also have that access as well. So thank you very much. I'm inspired. I'm sure our viewers and other speakers are inspired too. I'm just going to go on to our next speaker now, Uthman Jeewa, the Senior Minister of Religion and Imam at Medinah Mosque.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I think to our esteemed guests, to our esteemed speakers, and to Dialogue Society, to Mahmoud and to Aisha as well, my thanks for organizing this lovely session. It's so nice to hear of all of the inspirational work and all of the fantastic work that is taking place nationally, I think locally as well, in Brighton and Hove. And it's so nice to hear that even in such times, such bad times, such times of struggle, we're seeing such beautiful actions, small actions of kindness, and the impact of it is huge in our communities. And it's just amazing to see the response from our community, to see how other communities are responding, what services they are providing, and it also, I think, gives us an opportunity to take ideas from one another as well. that what one community is providing can possibly be implemented into a different community. Myself, I lead, you can say, a fairly small community when you come to think of it. The mosque that I lead at, you say prior to the first lockdown, our congregation on Friday would number anything between 800 to 1,000. And the various services that we provided were the daily prayers and children's classes, youth sessions, and the various other services that I think various other faith organizations and faith institutes are providing. And I think one of the greatest challenges for us was to move all of our work that we were doing face to face, moving everything online. So, for example, we run an evening supplementary school, a madrasa, for a number of children. So the approximate number of students that we have number anything between 250 to 300. So we've got about 275 students, and moving 275 students from face-to-face teaching to online teaching in itself was a huge challenge. But this was just one of the many challenges that we faced as a community. And as Imam Monawar Hussain also highlighted as well, challenges around bereavement, challenges around burial, the various other challenges that we faced. I think for many communities, the response was just fantastic. How communities they responded to these various challenges. As a mosque that is based in a very diverse but very beautiful city of Brighton and Hove, for a number of years we have maintained contacts with various organizations, whether it's on an interfaith platform or whether it is the local food banks. We've maintained connections with them for a number of years. And I think the benefit of those relationships and those connections that we had is that we were able to help one another during these trying times. So as an example, we worked with an organization, a local food bank known as Voices in Exile, that provided you can say a local food bank service to many vulnerable families and many refugee families as well. And I think around about the time of the first lockdown, a few weeks into the first lockdown, the kind of information that we were receiving from various food banks was that they were overwhelmed and they seemed to be struggling with the challenges that they were facing. So they reached out to their various contacts, and one of their contacts was the local mosque, Medinah Mosque, in terms of asking if there was any services that the mosques were also providing as well, or any faith institutes were also providing. We were very fortunate that as a mosque, I think what we realized is that the building was no longer being used for congregational prayers, was no longer being used for face-to-face teaching. So during the period of the first lockdown, we realized that the mosque was just an empty building, a building which wasn't being used for congregational prayers, wasn't being used for anything else. So what we decided is that during the first lockdown, the mosque was used as, you can say technically as a storage facility for a food bank, which we created just looking at the demand and the need within our own community. And the response to this food bank was fantastic. Initially, we started with about 3 or 4 volunteers. And within a matter of days, we had a full team that was, operational. People were volunteering. We had a whole system which we were running, whereby local businesses were involved with the mosque in providing basic groceries. We had volunteers that were preparing grocery hampers. We were in contact with local food banks, with local authorities, with the local council, who were providing us with a list of people who were in need of support, who were in need of help. We then had generous donations coming in. We had one anonymous donation of £6,000. The person just wanted to remain anonymous, just in terms of providing that support for people within our own community. And this support that was being provided was for any person within Brighton and Hove, regardless of faith, creed, background, culture, gender, regardless of whatever a person identified as, the support was there for every single person. And the response was fantastic from our own community in terms of reaching out to people, the volunteers who volunteered to deliver, the volunteers who volunteered to prepare the grocery hampers, the local businesses who dropped off their supplies to the mosque. And eventually, I think our service grew to the extent that our delivery service was pretty much overwhelmed. So what we then decided to do is that we then decided to have a pickup service for certain people who were able to make their own way and pick up a hamper from the mosque. So every week we were providing support for approximately 40 to 50 families in terms of deliveries. And then we had an additional 15, 20 families that were actually coming to pick up their grocery hampers once a week, every Friday. So this is just this is just part of the kind of service that the mosque was offering. I also work with a local charity by the name of Deen Relief, which the charity's main focus is in providing assistance and help locally as well as globally. So many projects that they have done in various parts of the world, and locally for a number of years they have been helping with feeding the homeless, helping and assisting in any way possible. Now, part of what Deen Relief did during this the pandemic and during the first lockdown was Deen Relief decided that they would work with local restaurants, local catering companies, and local businesses in providing food, fresh, hot food for frontline staff and NHS. So what happened is that this charity, they would pick up food from a particular business. They would then transport that food to the local hospital, Royal Sussex County Hospital, and hot food would then be provided every single day for frontline and NHS staff. And the response was fantastic. Food was hot, food was fresh from a variety of catering companies, so a variety of cuisines. You had the you had the Indian food, you had the Arab food, you had the Italian food, and there's a variety of cuisines. And the gratitude and the smiles that we saw on the face of the frontline staff who during I think the pandemic, the struggles that they have gone through, just giving something back to them and seeing the smiles on their faces in itself was just totally worth it. So this is just some of the work that the local Muslim community was providing. One of the biggest challenges that we found, and I think all faith leaders will attest to this fact, is that we have seen that the lockdown had a huge impact on the mental health of a number of people. We're not just talking about the elderly, but also amongst the youth as well. The impact it had on the mental health of individuals. So as part of that, and I'm sure that all faith leaders were providing this service, was allowing people just to call in, allowing people just to reach out to us, and also reaching out to people who we felt were in need, people who we felt would appreciate a phone call, people who we felt would appreciate that conversation, just reaching out to them just to see how they were doing, and just letting the community know that we were there if there was any further need or if they required anything from us. One of the greatest challenges around bereavement, and it's very sad that we see that many people that we had with us before the lockdown, and many of us will be able to name people who were with us, earlier on in the year. However, these people, they have, as a consequence of the virus, have been taken from us. We do remember them. We do pray for them. They are in our thoughts. And I think challenges just surrounding that. a few years ago, we set up something which was known as the local bereavement fund. And the idea of the local bereavement fund was, often we found that certain people would leave this world and people would pass away, people would die, and they would not have the funds available to pay for a funeral, to pay for a burial. So the responsibility that was taken on by the Muslim community a few years ago, which we felt was very beneficial during this lockdown. Certain members of the community did access this bereavement fund, was that it allowed families to know that if anything, if any of their loved ones who were sick, who were leaving this world, who were in the final moments or the final phases of their life, if anything was to happen to them, they know that they could have relied on the community to step forward and to assist and to help in any way possible. So these are just a few of the services. And you know, it's like I said, it's just fantastic just to hear from other communities as well, to see what other communities are doing. And it's lovely to hear that in such sad times, such lovely work is actually going on. Once again, my appreciation to Dialogue Society, because I believe that, you know, events like this and sessions like this, where we can highlight all of the good work that is going on, it allows a bit of optimism into our lives as well, and it allows us to actually appreciate the people around us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imam Uthman, for highlighting, you know, the responses from your own community and local mosque. Sorry, as you said, you've had, you know, tremendous challenges from transferring hundreds of children into online classes. The struggles of bereavement services, like you mentioned, which is undoubtedly, you know, the toughest time for a lot of families and friends. So in such tough times, for you to be as a mosque to support your community is extremely important. And also, I love the idea of the mosque, you know, you noticing it, that it was just an empty building. I think that was, you know, a lovely metaphor. I've seen similar examples of mosques and churches being transformed into, you know, homeless shelters. But I think the idea of a storage facility for a food bank, which you mentioned as being like, you know, the kind of specific need of your community is wonderful. It just shows, you know, the kind of multi-purpose nature of a mosque, the being there to serve the community. So I think that was lovely. And I loved how I kind of made a link between, you know, the diverse food and cuisine that you said you provided, and then, you know, to that of the diverse communities in Brighton. So I'm sure your local community do appreciate and are there supporting you, and I hope it continues after the pandemic too. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us this evening. We're now on to our last speaker, last but not least, of course, Chinta Kallie, from the Oxford Hindu Temple and Community Centre.
Namaste, Namaskar, Vanakkam, and Jai Sri Krishna. Thank you very much, Aisha and Mahmood, for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Hindu community in Oxford. But before I go on, there are a number of responses I'd like to make to what Monawar said and what Andy said, what Penny said. But in spite of being a person of a certain age, I always like to do what I'm told. And Mahmood was quite strict that there was a limit of about 5 to 6 minutes on each talk. So I won't spend time talking about the clapping and meeting people who are total strangers, suddenly become very familiar and friendly. And so I just wanted to go on to say that, you know, practical response of Hindus everywhere to dealing with the pandemic is no different from that of other faith communities throughout the country or the county, or really throughout the world. And this unprecedented humanitarian crisis, really of untold proportions, has no boundaries. And people of all faiths and all backgrounds have been equally affected. The universal prayer for Hindus, used by the Oxford Hindu Temple and Community Centre project, is particularly applicable at this devastating time because it is so universal in its message. And I'm hoping that other faiths, people of other faiths, will understand what it means. So just to go into a bit of recitation, which is in Sanskrit, this prayer goes as follows. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. And it means, lead us, O Lord, from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Now, everyone in the city of Oxford and in the multi-faith network is aware that Hindus, after 12 years of fundraising and campaigning, do not have a permanent place of worship like the Muslim community and the Jewish community in the city has. And the closure of the Rose Hill Community Centre, which had been used for monthly prayer sessions, brought an end to communal worship for the Hindu community in Oxford, which I must say in comparison is relatively small. So the first and foremost duty of the OHTCCP, the Hindu Community Committee, was to ensure that the community was aware that there was this closure, and then families were encouraged to do prayers at their own home, to avoid social gatherings and social contact, and above all, to very strictly adhere to government guidelines. So online monthly prayers have been planned and delivered, but digital illiteracy amongst many families means that a significant number of people miss out on this because they're not computer literate and don't have the necessary facilities to actually go online. And obviously this has increased isolation and loneliness even more. The second duty of the Hindu community as such was to give accurate and relevant information to the community as well as individual families needing advice on rituals such as deaths, births, moving house, writing exams. All these separate events in a family require special prayers, and so advice has been given by members of the committee to these families. I think it is relevant to mention here that the Oxford Hospitals Trust and the NHS employ a significant percentage of people from the Black and minority ethnic communities. And although advice is given to them and protection, PPE is provided, it still has not been enough. And members of our community actually working in the hospital, in the JR2, in COVID wards, have been given that extra little bit of advice and support as to how to protect themselves. Just to give you an example, a member of our community contracted the disease and she became very ill. She obviously had to isolate, and this caused a ripple of anxiety throughout the whole community. Obviously, no visits were allowed, but several members of our community provided advice and support, did shopping and for food and essentials, and were able to make deliveries to this particular household. Practical help was not possible for someone like me. I live in a little village, and I'm very conscious that I ought not to go out. So I kept very much at home, but got volunteers who were fit and able to actually do the work for me. And I think it's true to say that the story of this particular individual brought to light this Hindu concept of seva. The word service in Latin comes from the Sanskrit word seva, which means duty. And that places a kind of unwritten duty on people to provide a service to anyone in need, regardless of the fact that there may be a reward at the end of that period or not. Now, the Hindu community as such has a number of social gatherings, festivals, and religious events. And these have been publicized in the newsletters, in our newsletters, and also in our annual calendar. And recently we had Diwali, which is the equivalent of your Christmas and Eid and Hanukkah. And it is the most important festival for Hindus throughout the year. It is a celebration which is massive. It involves friends and family. Now, this celebration had to be done online. And you can imagine the amount of publicity that had to go into putting this 4-day event on. There was enormous publicity, enormous mobilization of volunteers to do various things. And it was important to get entertainment in a way that had a wide appeal for all age groups and people of all faiths. Because Diwali as a whole, which was one of our biggest celebrations and an annual event that the entire community looked forward to, it had to have entertainment, it had to have several messages about togetherness, community cohesion, support, love of music, love of food, love of not just eating for yourself, but distributing trays of goodies to your neighbors and friends. Now, obviously, this was not physically possible, but when the event was held online, there were several times when you felt your mouth really watering to taste the jalebis and taste the bhajiyas that were being cooked. Now, during this 4-day celebration, on the first day, the god that was invited was Lord Ganesha, who is the remover of obstacles. And fervent prayers were offered to Lord Ganesha that he removes the obstacles. Now, the obstacle of the pandemic is something that is insurmountable, cannot be measured, cannot be seen. It's a dark force that is there, and everybody is aware, but some people are blissfully unaware. But anyway, prayers were offered by the Hindu community to Lord Ganesha to take away the pain and the suffering and to alleviate as much poverty and misery as possible. We also did prayers to the goddess Lakshmi, who is the goddess of light. And in this dark and dreary time, it was very important to seek her blessings and to ensure that wherever possible, people lit a candle or lit a lamp to light the way towards some kind of peace, inward peace as well as outward peace and tranquility for everyone, regardless of which faith they came from. This instinctive desire to meet and greet, to hug, to hold people close to your heart, that had to be sacrificed, and obviously created quite a lot of sadness for everybody, because there was no longer that platform on which you could actually go out with your tray, meet people, and exchange very close love and affection. So hugging and embracing were not possible. Instead, the traditional greeting of Namaste, which is two hands placed together, also called Namaskar or Jai Sri Krishna, it came into its own virtually. And we found that it was adopted by many other faiths because it didn't entail any touching and any kind of physical contact. So, long live Namaste. The other thing that was done by our community was the women within community got together and decided to form a group who would sing online. So they sang basically religious songs, which are called bhajans or kirtans, and this was in order to keep the spirits up. So there were exchanges of lyrics, either from the internet or from past experiences that people had listening to people in their families, exchanging the words, exchanging the lyrics, and then singing to each other. And then WhatsApp. I mean, I cannot say how helpful WhatsApp has been. So we've been singing to each other, talking to each other, exchanging messages on what is called the Kirtan group, and ensuring that anyone who was lonely, isolated, or not digitally competent were able to actually share in some way with the messages of love and hope and happiness. Now, in this present crisis, places of worship have been closed, and several temples, for example, there's one in Middleton Stony, which is in Oxfordshire. It is called the Guru Kripa, and then there's the temple in Neasden, which is the Swaminarayan temple, and the Balaji temple in Birmingham. Now, all these temples have been closed to the public, but a certain number have been allowed to gain access on special occasions, provided they gave details of what the occasion was and how many people were going to attend. In place of this, priests have been very, very sympathetic and have offered prayers on behalf of families who provided details of what was being observed at any particular time. Now, members of the Hindu temple are constantly emphasizing in their prayers, in their supplications, the need for fortitude, the need for patience, the need for courage and perseverance to face this very relentless spread of this virus. And like Hindus and people of other faiths all over the world, we're praying that medical experts and relevant authorities will make this newly discovered vaccine available to the most vulnerable groups in our society, and many specialists who obviously involved will have to work out a very, very strategic plan on how the vaccine is delivered. So it's very important that we, as a multicultural community, get together and pool all our spiritual resources and our collective spirituality. We pull them all together so that there's no division between what you're praying for, what I'm praying for, but that we get together to ensure that there is unison in our efforts, not only to deal with the virus, but also to give support, guidance, and help to those people who are helpless, poor, lonely, and weak. my conclusion again would be to repeat this universal prayer, which I myself have realized is so powerful. After years and years of reciting it and praying with it in the forefront, I realized just how meaningful it is at the moment. So it says, "O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti." That means peace, peace, peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chinta, for sharing the both difficulties and beauties that the Hindu community have lived through over the past few months, and both starting and ending with your lovely universal prayer of the Hindu community. I'm sure all of us feel the meaning with us and relate to it, which is lovely in itself. I was saddened to hear, of the lack of space available for your community, but grateful that you've been able to use, online mediums to kind of compensate, perhaps if it's from a struggle of words, I'd say compensate for that and bring people together. And as you said, I think the kind of analogy of service or as duty, and the beauty in that and not expecting something in return. I think that's also a kind of universal value that perhaps other faiths also experience, and it's lovely to see that the same values are carried through in humanity. The lighting of a candle, lighting the way for an inward peace of all, regardless of faith, is kind of a lovely metaphor to see coming through. And then the use of apps like WhatsApp and singing songs to one another and sharing messages of hope and kindness and peace, of course, are all things that have boosted morale of both the Hindu community and other community members of faith and non-faith members over the past few months. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us here this evening. I am a bit conscious of time at the moment. I do think we started a little late, but I just want to kind of ask a couple of questions that have come through on the YouTube chat from our viewers, and then hopefully if we could just feel free to comment on each other's talks as kind of a means of closing remarks. So one of the first questions that we received is, what is the biggest challenge you encountered during COVID-19? My question is for Reverend Andy Lowe specifically. Perhaps, Reverend, if you could start off with an answer and then we could comment on it too.
That's a really difficult one. I think partially trying to find not those who are in need, but those who are most in need, and trying to discern and to reach to those people who might not always say that they need, but actually we know they are. So I think identifying the people who were most isolated, most in need of help, and how we try and direct time and resources towards those. I think that was probably one of them. Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, really. I'm thinking about that a bit more.
Yeah, and I was surprised it was directed at you, so it's a bit tough to, I think, be put on the spot. But no, I think that's a challenge that perhaps other communities also experience. And I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to kind of comment on the biggest challenge they face.
The hardest thing I found through the pandemic was we've had a number of loved ones pass away in our family. Just, I mean, a great uncle of mine, he was about 85, 90. and nobody being able to visit them in hospital, and not being able to attend their janazah, their funeral prayer. And these are things that you don't get second chances at. And I think they will weigh heavily on many souls for the rest of their lives. And that's across the board, faith, no faith, whatever, and that's really tough. And that also has implications for our mental well-being, our spiritual well-being, a whole load of things. So that's been the most hardest thing I've felt. And my heart goes out to so many other people who can't visit their parents or grandparents or their loved ones. My very dear friend, his mother passed away in hospital, and he couldn't visit her, and it's going to weigh heavily on people. So that's the hardest thing I think I found about this. Just the contact that we took for granted was taken away, and we've had no control over it.
Yeah, I would certainly echo those feelings too.
Yep, go ahead.
I just come in on a purely personal level. I live on my own, but with the dog. The thing that I've found most difficult is not being able to hug my grandchildren and my children. Even when I've seen them, and there have been the opportunities to see them, to have to stand socially distanced, and for the youngest ones to have to be told, no, you can't hug grandma. That's really, really tough. And when I talk to other people of my age, they all say the same thing. It's that contact with their families. It's the extension, in a sense, of what Monawar is saying. It isn't just missing the opportunities to be with the bereaved or with the dying. It's the opportunities to share joy and love with the living. And that's really tough. And a dog is no substitute.
Okay, I'll just go on to the next question, the last question. And it's kind of about the interfaith community as a whole, really. Do you think a nationwide interfaith coordination is required specifically during such times, or should it be kept local, as we're doing perhaps?
My own personal view is that if you want strong communities, you've got to build local relationships. Mm-hmm. So when bad things happen in communities, you can pick up each other's phone and talk to each other, and there's trust. Where there's trust, there's strong communities. Once that trust isn't there, then you can do lots of stuff nationally, coming down, but it has to be at local level for me.
I'm with Monawar all the way. It's that local contact, the local friendships, the local knowledge about who needs support and how you can best give support. And especially when those communities are threatened, I think the united effort that can be put in towards supporting people who you've known and loved and lived with, I think at a local level, it doesn't matter what the people at the top say, it's those particular relationships that are the most important.
Yeah, I think so too. I think compassion is not something you can be told to have by national leadership. That's something you learn by being with each other and being alongside each other. So, but I do still think there is a need at national level for there to be that kind of group of people who are speaking to governments and actually saying, this is not something about one particular group in society, it's about the whole of society and the way we treat each other. So I do think we need to have a national voice, as well as actually the practice being what happens at local level.
Thank you. Chinta, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to depart from that question a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Just to say, on the issue of food and food banks, I think within the interfaith or network, there needs to be an awareness that there are certain taboos and restrictions on why people cannot take advantage of food that has been prepared by the most kind-hearted people, because there might be vegetarianism, there might be people who will not eat halal food, people who might want halal food, people who are vegetarian, and so on. So within the Hindu community, there are certain festivals where they will not, for example, have any food that is cooked with onions and garlic. Now, there needs to be an understanding on why food banks with ready prepared food like Annie was talking about cannot really be accessed by people of certain faiths. And I think it's quite important that that is really clearly understood. If you belong to a multi-faith organization, we have the Council of Faiths in Oxford, and I, for one, believe that it is very important to have a local voice, as Penny and Monawar have said. Southeast England Faith Forum, that tends to be rather diffused, and although I attend the meetings, it is quite distant in some ways, distant physically to get to, but also the issues that confront people in different parts of the Southeast England are different from what we face in Oxford.
Definitely. I think all groups, all of us, all the speakers would kind of echo that as well. So I think that is the end of the evening then. Thank you all our speakers, firstly, for being here with us this evening. I mean, as the Dialogue Society, we hoped that the event would convey messages of hope, of solidarity, and kind of inspire communities to stand stronger as a cohesive society. And I hope it's lived up to this intention, and I hope it takes it beyond and above this intention with all the practices that our communities are doing together. So thank you to our speakers and viewers once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to you, Isham. Thank you for chairing it so beautifully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye.